Well, hello everyone. This is your friendly neighborhood pastor, Pastor Chris Johnson, coming to you from Christ the King Lutheran Church in Escanaba, Michigan. We're getting ready this weekend for the second Sunday after Pentecost, and we're back in the Gospel of Mark for much of the season of Easter. We were in the Gospel of John, and we're back in Mark. We were in Mark for a while there during the time after Epiphany and during Lent. But then we were in John, but now we're back in Mark, and we'll be in Mark's Gospel for much of the summer until we hop back into John in August as we look at the Bread of Life series from John chapter 6. So, but we're in Mark chapter 2 and 3 this week, and we catch the tail end of a number of controversies that Mark records starting in the beginning of chapter 2. We catch the tail end of that at the end of chapter 2, verses 23, and the last controversy, the fifth one in this block of controversies for chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. So there's a lot going on here. Without further ado, let me go ahead and read it for you and give you some thoughts and reflections on it. St. Mark writes, "One Sabbath he, Jesus, was going through the grain fields, and as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, 'Look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?' And he said to them, 'Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need of food? He entered the house of God when Abiathar was high priest and ate the bread of the presence, which it was not lawful for any but the priests to eat, and he gave some to his companions.' Then he said to them, 'The Sabbath was made for humankind, and not humankind for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath.' Again he entered the synagogue, and there was a man who had a withered hand. As they watched to see whether he would cure him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And Jesus said to the man who had the withered hand, 'Come forward.' Then he said to them, 'Is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath, to save life or to kill?' But they were silent. He looked at them with anger. He was grieved at their hardness of heart, and said to them, 'Stretch out your hand.' He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out immediately and conspired with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him." The Gospel of the Lord. So in these two stories about controversy, one we see again Jesus healing someone on the Sabbath. Right after the walking in the grain fields, he healed someone on the Sabbath. And so there's controversy here because Jesus is apparently doing what is not according to the oral tradition of the Pharisees, what is not lawful. And I think the background there, which is helpful, is that we've got the commandments in Scripture. They're all over the place, Deuteronomy, Exodus, and so on. But there's commands all over in Scripture. Certainly in the New Testament there are some as well. But what the Pharisaical tradition was about was building a hedge, a fence around the laws, the clear prescriptions and commandments of the Scriptures, so that you do not get even close to breaking those. And so they added more fences around the commandments. So one way, I guess, you've got commandments which are there to preserve life. You've got this nice white fence surrounding the commandments of God, so we can live a good, holy life. And then the Pharisees, in a way, put up another fence with barbed wire, saying, we're not even going to let you get close to trying to break these commandments. And what Jesus exposes here is that in their attempt to have traditions, and so Jesus isn't downplaying all human traditions, because there can be some that are good. But what Jesus is downplaying here is that for the sake of mercy, the Pharisees are missing something very clear. On the one hand, about eating food on the Sabbath, plucking grain, which was allowed in Deuteronomy. We read about that in Deuteronomy chapter 23, and so you can pluck grain with your hands, but reaping is what's disallowed. And so the Pharisaical tradition then had this interpretation about even plucking can be considered work, as doing something, as reaping on the Sabbath. And Jesus said, well, let me give you an example from Scripture. And he gives the example of David eating food out of the very temple of God. And so, but underneath this, the first part of this passage, chapter 2, verses 23 to 28, it's not so much about food. It's more so about Jesus and who has the authority to establish what is right, holy, and true? Is it the oral tradition of the Pharisees based on the scriptures, or is the authority based on a person, based on Jesus Christ, the Son of Man, who is the Lord of the Sabbath, who inaugurated the Sabbath, who made the Sabbath for humankind and not humankind for the Sabbath? And so on the surface, you've got the food issue and doing work, but below the surface, you got more of a deep sense of who is this Jesus Christ fellow, and who is he to say that he can order things on what is right and permissible on the Sabbath? And so it's kind of about authority too. But also in this comparison, I think Jesus is in citing this text from 1 Samuel, Jesus is also lifting up how much more important he is than David. That if David could do this and go into the temple, me, who I am the Son of Man, I have even more authority than David did. He was the king. I am the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, because I am the Son of Man, who is even Lord over the Sabbaths. And so he's making a comparison there with him and David, I think. And the second part of this passage, chapter 3, verses 1 through 6, Jesus, because he's the Lord of the Sabbath, what does he do? He goes and he heals on the Sabbath. And now, one of the traditions that was hedged around the commandment of honoring the Sabbath day and keep it holy is a tradition built on, if someone is in very dire straits and needs to be healed, then they can indeed, that's an okay thing. But with this, the man with the withered hand, we're not told how long he had a withered hand, but Jesus went ahead and just healed him. This guy, his life apparently was in no mortal danger. He had a withered hand. It would have been just as withered, I guess, the next day. But Jesus goes ahead and does this to prove that he is who he is and he can do what he wants to do because he is the Lord of the Sabbath. And he puts the Pharisees in this place because he's doing something good. Was this man's life in danger? Well, no. Jesus could have healed this guy the next day. He didn't have to do the healing on the Sabbath, but he did it to prove a point, that he is the Lord of the Sabbath, that he will give life to whom he chooses, and he chooses this man to restore him to life. And whether it's on Sabbath or on Monday or Tuesday, it doesn't matter. God is going to heal who he wants to heal and when he wants to heal them, because Jesus, of course, again, is the Lord of the Sabbath. There's some irony in this passage because Jesus puts the Pharisees in their place. Is it lawful to do good or do harm on the Sabbath, to save life or to kill? Jesus helps life. He fosters life. He helps the life of this man with the withered hand flourish. But what do the Pharisees do? They conspire with the Herodians, and they plot to destroy Jesus. So they who were watching Jesus to do something bad on the Sabbath, they themselves engage in evil behavior, trying to destroy the Son of God, who is the Lord of the Sabbath. So just some initial thoughts and questions on here. Initial thoughts and observations. I apologize for being a little bit late with the Memorial Day holiday, pushed things back a little bit, but all the same, may God bless you as you dive into this text. Get ready for the second Sunday of Pentecost as we dive back into the early ministry of Jesus, what he did, what he said, and what he was all about. So God bless you, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye.